rejects his redistricting demands in the face of his threats. Plus, the president suffers more losses in court on both his revenge and deportation tours. Also, economic pain, all dolled up. The White House on the defense over Trump telling Americans to settle for less.
Do you think the people in that room in Pennsylvania who the president was speaking to don't know the president's a billionaire?
And Kristi Noem, confronted over how many veterans she's deported, including a Purple Heart.
Earlier this year, you deported him to Korea. This man took 2 bullets for our country.
Live at the table, Cornel West, Stephen Moore, Justin J. Pearson, Lydia Moynihan, Natasha Sarin, and Ellie Honig. Americans with different perspectives aren't talking to each other, but here they do. Good evening, I'm Abby Phillip in New York. Let's get right to what America's talking about. A Republican rebuke of Donald Trump after facing bomb threats, swatting attacks, and potential cuts to federal funding, and the imminent threat of a Trump-backed primary. Tonight, Indiana Republicans rejected the president's demands that they called blackmail. All in all, nearly 1 in 4 GOP Indiana state senators received threats after repeatedly rejecting Trump's calls to pass a new congressional map. And despite holding a supermajority in the state, 21 Republicans joined Democrats to vote down that proposed map that would have net Republicans 2 additional seats. Now, last month, Trump posted on social media attacking 2 state lawmakers, and just a few hours later, one of them was the victim of a swatting attack. Ahead of today's vote, the vice president spoke out against the state Senate leader, and Trump suggested that they were rhinos for doing the dirty work of Democrats. So here's one of those Republicans explaining why she voted no.
Was there ever a moment where you thought that the pressure was going to work and the intimidation was going to work in the Senate?
No, not really.
Not with Hoosiers.
No, I mean, you wouldn't change minds by being mean. And the efforts were mean-spirited from the get-go. You know, if you were wanting to change votes, you would probably try to explain why we should be doing this in a positive way. That never happened. So, I think they get what they get. I mean, and I very frankly, I wish that President Trump would change his tone.
That Republican state senator, Jean Leasing, was herself a victim of a pipe bomb threat. Lydia, this seems like a spectacular fail on the part of Trump and his allies. They put an enormous amount of pressure on Republicans. And so I've seen several Republicans comment tonight that pressure had the opposite effect. The bullying is how they described it, had the opposite effect. Was it a mistake?
Look, I think this is something that Republicans really need to get ahead of. They've sort of been fighting with one hand behind their back because over the last 30 years or so, Democrats have sort of tipped the scales, and there are numerous states, almost a dozen, where Republicans aren't represented at all, even though they represent about 40% of who voted for Donald Trump. And so I think a lot of folks in MAGA wanted to see these sort of scales realigned and make sure that Republicans have a voice. And I think it's interesting, even in the last few days, we've seen now Virginia, which is a state that Kamala Harris won by just 5 points. There's a push there by that state legislature to redistrict and gerrymander in favor of Democrats. So we're seeing Democrats are fighting, and Republicans, at least in the case of Indiana, seem to be fighting with one hand behind their back, even though that's a state that Trump won by about 20 points.
That's an interesting way to put it, because Virginia wouldn't even be considering this if Texas hadn't started it. California would have done nothing if Texas hadn't started it. I take your point to some degree about gerrymandering being a general problem in this country. There are a lot of Democratic states that are gerrymandered. There are a lot of Republican states that are gerrymandered. But this mid-decade redistricting fight is happening because Republicans started it. And now it won't go the way it seems that Trump wanted ultimately.
No, that's exactly right. And I mean, we have to be honest. It is only because President Trump pushed Texas to change their maps that we are in this situation. This is supposed to happen every decade. It is happening mid-year because he's worried about Democrats winning back control of the House. What I want to do, and one of the reasons I'm fighting and running for Congress, is because we need national redistricting laws that make sure that there's an equitable process. Yes, it's a loss for Donald Trump right now in Indiana, but we have to be realistic. These billionaires are running the government. They are using all of their power, their influence, and their money to determine who's in positions of power. And so, yes, it's a win today, but other people are going to cave to the pressure, just like Governor Abbott did. And so we, as Democrats, we have to hold strong and hold fast to what we believe about democracy, and that there needs to be equitable
Democrats had
representation.
already gerrymandered their states in a disgraceful way. I'm from Illinois. You know, you've got a district that goes all the way from the northern tip of the state to the southern. It's a little snake down the middle. I hate gerrymandering. I think it's the most atrocious thing. The six of us that
Are you
sitting
ready
at
for
this table
Congress to
could probably
get
come
rid
up
of
with
Are
better
you
maps.
ready for Congress to get rid of it altogether?
Yes.
Because I mean,
I'm
that's
absolutely
he's proposing
in favor of
that. Democrats
I mean,
have
we
proposed
shouldn't
that over
have the
years.
politicians choosing their voters. The voters should choose the
Yeah.
politicians.
Now, I can agree with you
It's
more
more
than
than
that.
that.
To that point, really more than
The legal landscape has changed dramatically just in the last few years. The Supreme Court in 2019 came out with a decision where they basically said, we are out of landscape has changed dramatically just in the last few years. The Supreme Court in 2019 came out with a decision where they basically said, we are out of this business.
That's right.
We are out of the business of regulating gerrymandering unless it's racially discriminatory. Now, the Texas revised map was challenged. The lower federal courts put it on hold. They said this might actually be racially discriminatory. And the Supreme Court last week unpaused it and said, no, you can go ahead with it. And so these are the fights that are going to be happening in state legislatures across the country. I mean, if you get elected to Congress and can pass a law that bars gerrymandering, God bless. I mean, I don't know that there's the political appetite, but you know, I wish you Godspeed.
I think if all of us can agree on it, there's some appetite in the country to stop the gerrymandering, but I'm so glad you hate it because in my state, it's run by Republicans in the House, in the Senate, and in the governor's mansion, we haven't had a lot of conservative people who have said they don't like gerrymandering. In fact, they took Nashville's congressional representation away, and so it was split into 3 different districts to try and reduce the amount of Democratic political power, but it also hurt a lot of immigrant communities. And so you're reaping what you have sown. And the fact that the judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court, has sided with Republicans in being able to hurt our democracy is really abysmal, like what we're seeing in Texas.
Just to get back to the part about what went wrong here for Republicans, because you would imagine, I mean, Indiana's Republicans have a lot of power. They could do basically whatever they want. But let me just play for you what was just said moments ago on the source. This is an Indiana State Senator, Mike Bohacek, who talked about why he flipped to a no on this new map. Listen.
I released a post about my displeasure over some the slurs that the president used. So we received a bomb threat that night at 1 o'clock in the morning. Of course, I had to wake up my family. We had to have bomb dogs search property around my house. Since then, my family's been staying with friends. I'm down at State House now until the end of the week, and they're still not staying at home. So it's very disruptive. I do have small children as well, so it's been a tough couple of weeks.
That slur that he's talking about was the R word that President Trump used against Tim Walz, who has a child with special needs. And Dr. West, I mean, this seems to me to be an example of people, regardless of their political party, in this case Republicans, rejecting the nastiness, rejecting the race to the bottom, and that is so few and far between these days. It's worth noting, it seems to me.
It really is, and I think the only way we can turn back, not just to gerrymandering, because gerrymandering for me is a symptom of a system that lacks a certain moral character. It's concerned only about the lowest levels of power. What I love about this brother is vision, character, integrity, honesty make a difference. And we're all going to fall short. But at least we aspire to it. I think the reason why you reject gerrymandering is the same way, right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But we just have to have examples, not just isolated examples of politicians. Let's be self-critical. But we got to get beyond this team versus this team. Partisanship is the only context of any conversation and dialogue. That's the
Here's
thing.
Here's my concern. I think this is something that you mentioned. Every state, virtually every state is gerrymandering. And Republicans can't unilaterally disarm here. In other words, you've got a kind of a arms race on who can gerrymander their state the most to win the most seats, given the fact that there's only, what's the Republican majority in the House, like 3 or 4 right now. Every seat matters, and that's why you've got this.
But I mean, but don't you acknowledge that in this moment, right, as we sit here now, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all had Trump Trump and his party said, we need to protect ourselves from losses in the 2026 midterm elections, and to do so, we're going to create some new Republican seats. Redistricting happened 5 years
They've
ago.
already done that in
But hold on,
California.
but
They've already done it in
redistricting-
Illinois.
Happened 5 years ago. New York tried to gerrymander
Right.
the state, and they were overruled in the courts. So there is a process that all these states went through. Republicans are short-circuiting that process. I mean, don't you acknowledge that is different from the broader issue of whether or not gerrymandering is good or bad, which I think we all agree is bad?
Except that if you look at the big blue states, their gerrymandering has been pretty outrageous. If you look at California,
What
if you
about
look
the
at
big, what about the,
Look at
what about the
Tennessee.
big red states?
You did say look at Tennessee.
but not to the extent, I mean, California, as you said, you know, that 42% of the people in California are Republicans, and there's virtually hardly any Republican seats out of the 50 or so. So it's, and incidentally, on the racial issue, I mean, the racial gerrymandering was started by Democrats who wanted to have all black districts and all Hispanic districts, and that was, I thought that was a terrible idea. By the way, that hurt Democrats because they put all the Democratic voters in one district. So
I think, to be honest here, we have to acknowledge that the current sort of rash of gerrymandering was started by Donald Trump. In fact, when he announced a few weeks ago, we're going to do this in Texas, as the lawyer, I said, you can't do that. It's only after the census. We're mid-decade. But you can, it turns out, I learned. And they've opened up this Pandora's box because the temptation is always there. For whoever controls what state, let's gerrymander. You can always squeeze out one more seat. And I applaud these legislators in Indiana. And by the way, I wish the California voters would have rejected Gavin Newsom's effort. And I wish the Texas powers that be would have not gone down that road. But you're right, Steve. I mean, it's a prisoner's dilemma. What's good for one is not
It's
good for
such
all.
an important point because, I mean, you made the point, it's a Pandora's box. There's really nothing stopping either party from doing this whenever they want to. And, you know, what becomes of our democracy when every 2 years they're just changing the districts to suit their political needs? It's a brave new world we're in now. Well, up next for us, if